The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll proceed now where we left off yesterday in the book, the title of which is Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley, the Protestant historian, the British Protestant historian. And I was speaking to one of my friends not long ago, and he said, well, a better title for that book might be Rome and No Civil Liberty, which is essentially what James A. Wiley is telling us in this book. Now, yesterday we concluded with the beginning of page 95, and James A. Wiley was relating to us direct quotes from Roman Catholic periodicals, official news magazines, or rather church publications, Roman Catholic Church publications, expressing the outright disdain, for lack of a better word, that Roman Catholics, both in England and Ireland, had against the British Crown, the Protestant government of Great Britain. They had no particular hatred, or so they said, of Queen Victoria, but it's what she represented. It was a government, well, not of, by, and for the Pope. And that was their objection. Now remember, the period of time that we're discussing was immediately preceded by a period of, well, for lack of a better term, beggary by Roman Catholics that they be given back some religious rights. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, so I won't belabor the point. But Rome, or rather England, and I believe because of a somewhat of a loss of their Protestant understanding, and that is what the papacy really represents. They had forgotten that the papacy is the Antichrist of the Bible, and began to be a little bit sympathetic toward this plea, this begging of Roman Catholics for some of the anti-Catholic laws to be taken out of the books. And the very moment that Britain began to yield toward that sentiment, the Pope barged in and established a hierarchy, a priestly hierarchy, and began dividing up the land and a parallel government to take over the government of England. It was the protest of the papacy was that the government of England wasn't Catholic. It was heretical. It was Protestant. And that Parliament passed laws that were inconsistent with Roman Catholic canon law. And Rome's attitude is, as we've said so many times here on Inquisition Update, that the Pope is the vicar of Christ and he is the rightful ruler of the world, and that all the governments of the world should serve him and obey him and be Roman Catholic. So, the minute England began to take down her armor, the papacy tried to overthrow the government. And then all of a sudden, Roman Catholic publications exposed the true motive of the papacy and the Cardinal Wiseman, and the bishops under his jurisdictions, and the dioceses. It was all an attempt to overthrow the government. And no one could deny it. Rome didn't deny it. The Roman Catholic Church publications didn't deny it. And so they set about expressing their disdain for the unlawful government of England, that is, the Queen and the Parliament. From the Pope's point of view, they were no government at all because they didn't serve the Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Now, beginning on page 95, just for after my little preface, we'll continue now reading what James A. Wiley says. He says, one of the first acts of Cardinal Wiseman after his return from Rome was to remove from the canon of the Mass, that is, the text of the Mass, it's a written text that they follow, they removed from the canon of the Mass the prayer for the Queen, and to cause all the missals, which is a prayer book used in the Roman Catholic Church, he caused all the missals of his diocese to be changed in order that the obnoxious passage in the text might be expunged. That obnoxious text being, again, the prayer for the Queen. Now, if the Pope's going to overthrow the government and declare the government of England, which was Protestant, to be heretical and therefore no government at all, it wanted Roman Catholics not to pray for the Queen, but the Pope was going to overthrow the Queen. So the first act of Cardinal Wiseman, once he returned from Rome, was to remove that prayer from the canon of the Mass and from the Missal. Now he says the only justification he assigned for this proceeding, removing the prayer for the Queen, the impropriety of having the name of a quote-unquote heretical prince, that is, Queen Victoria, mixed up with that of the Pope in the Mass. So you can see what an insult they've committed here against the Queen. Okay, and we must understand that prior to the attempt of the Pope to overthrow the government, Catholics were allowed to pray for the Queen. I mean, it was necessary as long as the Pope wasn't standing up and making a protest against the Protestant government of England. Well, Catholics just had to make do with the way things were. In order to have some favor within the government, they included this prayer. Well, now that's all changed. The Pope and the Cardinal are establishing a papal government in Great Britain, and they're not going to tolerate any prayers for the Queen. It's her government that they're going to overthrow and replace. So he continues, so far as ourselves are concerned, says James A. Wiley, we are thankful that the honored name of the Queen should be rescued from a championship or a contest so questionable. So that's James A. Wiley's retort. The Catholic Church has removed from the Mass and from the Missal any prayers for the Queen, and James A. Wiley's reply is, well, good. We don't need to have the name of our Queen messed up with that of the Pope. Now he says, still, the act of the Cardinal is nonetheless significant on that count. It clearly shows that in his opinion, the title of Victoria, that is the Queen, is invalid, and that her throne is as good as vacant. Okay? It's there, but it doesn't exist. The Pope has replaced it. Again, it's a hostile overtake of the government. He says, however, while papists avow their hostility against the Queen in her character as Queen, they entertain, they tell us, charitable feelings toward her personally. Now, obviously, trying to maintain some sense of humanity, but what's really behind this is they don't hold their disdain so much for Queen Victoria, perhaps because they might still try to proselytize her into the Roman Catholic Church, and that voluntarily the Protestant government of Great Britain through Queen Victoria will become Catholic. But let me tell you, there is no love at all for Victoria's person, despite their claim. Okay? Now he says, however, while papists avow their hostility against the Queen in her character of Queen, they tell us, charitable feelings toward her personally. And while they omit her name in their public devotions, quote, because she's not a member of the Christian church, unquote, meaning the Catholic Church, and does not rank with Catholic sovereigns, and de jure is not a sovereign at all, yet she has the benefit of being prayed for by the priests of Rome in a general and inferential way, that is, along with other, quote, heathens, publicans, and heretics, unquote, as the following paragraph from the Catholic Vindicator testifies. All right? So their prayers for the Queen are the same sort of prayers that they pray for other heathens and publicans and heretics. They're expressing their outright disdain for anything that is Protestant, and in this case, particularly the Queen and the Parliament. Now, here's the quote. Now, remember, the Vindicator is the Roman Catholic periodical that is, well, a little crass, if you'll pardon the expression, and not quite as, quote-unquote, civilized as the Tablet. So if you want to know what's really being said in the Roman world, you want to read the Vindicator. Now, here's a quote from it. Quote, how does the Church, that is the Roman Catholic Church now, how does the Church regard Queen Victoria and other heretical sovereigns? Has her name much prominence in her service? Nay, is it there at all? Did not the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster omit the prayer for the sovereign, which is only intended for a Catholic sovereign, they tell us in parentheses? Did not the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster omit the prayer for the sovereign at Southwark Cathedral on Good Friday? Of course he did, for the simple reason and very obvious reason that Queen Victoria is not a member of the Christian Church. Again, I remind you, he's speaking of the Catholic Church, which is not Christian at all. And it says, of that church which, if we refuse to hear and obey, we are at once classed with heathens and publicans. Okay? So they tell us flat out, if you don't belong to the Roman Catholic Church, you are a heathen and a publican. And Queen Victoria is a heathen and a publican because she's not a Roman Catholic. Now it says they are the words of Almighty God. All right? This is stated in parentheses, indicating that according to the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, which is the teaching of the Pope, they are publicans and sinners if they are not Roman Catholic, and that the Pope is the voice of Almighty God. Now he says, and hence, Queen Victoria is only prayed for generally in the prayer for heretics and schismatics with other Protestant unbelievers. Let us then act as our Holy Mother, the Church, does in the matter. And while we have none but charitable feelings toward the Queen personally, and most certainly wish her no greater harm than that she may one day be received into the Christian Church, even though it be at the cost of her throne, let us never forget that, whatever her boasted authority may be, it is as nothing and less than nothing compared to that of the Vicar of Christ, unquote. So clearly, I mean, you can't state it much clearer. They're going to overthrow the government. Now, I want to ask my listeners, we don't live in Great Britain, nor is it 1865. We live in the United States of America post-2016. What philosophy, what ideology, what do you think the Pope thinks of the government of the United States that's of, by, and for the people? Common sense dictates that he would hold the same loathing for a government that is of, by, and for the people as he did the government of Britain, because they have similar constitutions. And if given an opportunity, certainly we would at least suspect that Rome might be in the business of overthrowing the government. And if they were going to do that, how would they do it? Well, we might legally suspect that they might do it the same way they tried to do it in England, by establishing cardinals and breaking up the land into dioceses and appointing over those territories bishops and archbishops and writing their own laws and defying the laws of our Constitution, and having a very, very light, if not outright disdainful attitude toward our elected officials, and pray for them only that they would, eventually become Roman Catholic and serve the Pope and not the people. Well, that's exactly what's happening in the United States today. Rome never changes. The only thing they can do is just simply wait until the Protestant sentiment has died and Protestants become a little more and more, ecumenical, sympathetic to Roman Catholics, and then the Pope's free to take over. Okay, the only question is, at what time does that happen? Has it already happened, or is it yet in the future? My suggestion to you is it has happened a long time ago. And that while there's been no big fanfare, there's been no big announcement from Washington, D.C., the government just carries right along, and it does so with the blessing or the curse of the Pope, just like England did. And the laws are being fashioned to conform to Roman Catholic canon law. Now, I know I'm repeating myself, and I'm going to be accused of being a broken record again. But there are new listeners coming to Inquisition Update all the time, and it requires a bit of repetition. Now, he says these deliverances are in perfect harmony with the current stream of papal dogmatic teaching. They are simply fair and legitimate applications to the point in hand. The relations, to wit, of the Romanists of Great Britain and Ireland to the sovereign, of what the canonists and doctors of the Roman Catholic Church have taught on this subject. And does not this most conclusively show that modern papists are neither ashamed of their doctrines nor unacquainted with them? And that instead of being permitted to slumber in musty tomes or to lie hid in the darkness of some unfrequented library, they are diligently studied by them, that they may be reduced to practice. Not only are these doctrines taught from the chairs of Maynooth, the Jesuit college in Ireland, They are proclaimed from all the Romanist printing presses of the country. Not only do the youth in training for the Roman Catholic priesthood receive them as the fountainheads of their theology, the journalists and civilians of the Roman Catholic Church adopt them as the guiding maxims of their politics and enjoin them on all Romanists as an ethical code, which is as incapable of change as is the religious creed of Rome, and which must, with certain modifications of form, be inflexibly carried out in substance in every age and in all countries. Okay? In every age and in all countries. Roman Catholicism, little by little, yielding when it must, but charging ahead at every opportunity, must make Roman Catholic canon law the ethical code and the creed of every nation in every age. So you can see what the age-old strategy of popery has been from its very founding. And here we are, roughly 1,800 years or so after the founding of that diabolical church, and now we see it materializing in our country, just as it materialized in Britain in 1865. Now he says, the doctrine then so pitifully inculcated upon the consciences of Romanists of the empire in the above extracts just amounts to this. Listen carefully. That the globe is but the footstool of the priesthood. The relationship of the Pope to the outer world is that of its absolute and supreme master. His relationship to the inner and spiritual world is that of its sole and infallible director. Thus he stands with one foot on the bodies of men and the other foot on their souls. According to the Roman canonist Liguri, Alphonse Liguri, one of the diabolical doctors of the Roman Catholic Church, for instance, the world is under a theocracy, having the vicar of the universe at its head. Now, who's he speaking of? What term is he using? Vicar of the universe? Okay, that's what the official doctor of the Roman Catholic Church teaches. That the Pope, that the Pope is the vicar of God. And his jurisdiction is not just over the whole world, but over heaven as well. Now he further continues, he says, kings are but the mere lieutenants of that one divinely appointed and infallible ruler. And their thrones are but mushroom seats compared with Peter's chair. Okay, Peter's chair being the reference to the papal throne. So what is Rome's official position toward any earthly government? They're servants of the Pope, or they're not kings. They either promote Roman Catholic canon law, or they promote no law at all. And we just have to understand that Rome has the same attitude toward our government. And always has had. She's no respecter of persons in that regard. She's no respecter of nations in that regard. She is subjugating the whole world under her control. Now, if you're looking for, the owner of this so-called New World Order, just simply look to the Old World Order and you'll find it. There's nothing new about it at all. And, the only thing that separates the old world order from the new world order was the brief period of the Protestant Reformation. That's what put an end to the old world order. The Bible and Christ and a new understanding of the Scriptures and of Bible prophecy. Now that the people could read the Bible for themselves, they discovered for themselves what we teach here at Inquisition Update. The papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist of the Bible. And the New World Order is simply the resurrection of the Old World Order, and the Pope rules again. So says the Pope, anyway. We'll take a little break, and we'll be back. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendment Radio.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, the rapture will be canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. And if you'd like to support this program and keep it on the air here at First Amendment Radio, please sponsor, or rather support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And we thank First Amendment Radio and Nicholas for giving us the airtime. And we pray God's blessing for both Inquisition Update and First Amendment Radio. Now, returning to the subject at hand, before the break, James A. Wiley wrote, "Kings are but the mere lieutenants of that one divinely appointed and infallible ruler, that is the Pope. And their thrones are but mushroom seats compared to that of the Pope." So that's Roman Catholic teaching. James A. Wiley was very well read in what Rome teaches. He read Alphonse Liguori's writings and Bellarmine's writings. He was well qualified to be our instructor as to what we are to know about Roman Catholicism. And it's, to the Protestant mind, it is outrageous. And I think that's probably why so much of what is said is not so readily absorbed as true. But trust me, James A. Wiley isn't the only author that we've ever read here on Inquisition Update that has the same education and says the same things about it. The papacy regards itself as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He reigns over the spiritual world, he reigns over the temporal world, and he expects the whole world to conform to his image and to obey him and worship him. He's a false Christ. He's not the vicar of Jesus. He's not the vicar of God. He's the vicar of Satan himself. Roman Catholicism, the entire system, is that which the Bible calls the Antichrist. Now, James A. Wiley continues his education on here. He says, by the side of a policy ordained and administered by the Almighty through his vicar on earth, the Pope, adding the force of spiritual and eternal sanctions to the terrors of earthly punishment, the strongest human government dwindles into insignificance and is shriveled up into utter feebleness. All right? Utter feebleness. That's what he says of human governments. And the obligations which these governments may lay upon their subjects when the Pope speaks become but as the green withs upon the arm of the strong man. Now, James A. Wiley uses a term here that we're not familiar with in our generation. I looked it up. A withe is a green, what would I call it? Let's see. A willow, a green willow, or something out of which maybe rope would be made, like hemp. You know, when they used to harvest wheat, they would cut it with a scythe and then stand it up in bundles and then would tie the bundles with a green cord or a green stalk of something like hemp, possibly, or what's the name? Oh, the word I'm trying to come up with, off of a weeping willow tree or something. Okay, that's what a withe is. So I'll read it over again, so as not to confuse anybody. He says, according to the Pope, that human governments are shriveled up into utter feebleness. And the obligations of these governments may lay open, whatever obligations these governments may lay upon their subjects, when the pontiff speaks, become but as green withs upon the arm of the strong man. According to the doctrine of Liguori, the first obedience of the baptized, the only obedience from which no power can absolve them, is due to their spiritual sovereign. Okay, who is their spiritual sovereign? The Pope. And he says there is only one obligation which is unalterably binding, and it is this. Okay? Other laws inconsistent with that one paramount and unalterable obligation are not binding on the conscience. It may be a wise policy on the part of the faithful that their great doctors teach to submit to such laws, but as Bellarmine frequently confesses, this is Robert Bellarmine, a most renowned and revered Jesuit priest and writer, another one of the Jesuit doctors, let me call it that. Bellarmine frankly confesses it is the want of power alone that justifies that submission. In other words, Roman Catholics are to obey the civil power if it is in such case that they don't have the power to resist. But when that power comes, they do not have to recognize the civil government of the country. All right, this is what Bellarmine taught, and this is what Alphonse Liguori taught. And here we are at a time in 1865 when Catholics prior to now have had no power, and they've had to been at least congenial to the government of England. Well, now that the Pope has decided to install his cardinal and his bishops and his dioceses and form his own government, then Roman Catholics have the power to resist. And now they are bound by their spiritual allegiance to the Pope to join that rebellion against that heretical government. That's what James A. Wiley is trying to tell us. And he says a more modern and more popular, if not more authoritative doctor, namely Liguori, has said that pernicious laws are no laws. Now he says pernicious laws. In other words, laws that contradict Roman Catholic canon law are not laws. Now he says apply these doctrines on the subject of civil allegiance to the condition of the faithful in Britain, that is, Roman Catholics in Britain, and we should be forced to some startling conclusions. In our country, the quote-unquote faithful live in the midst, if not of their enemies, yet of God's. They are governed by statutes framed by heretical legislators, that is, Protestant legislators, which doubtless are the most pernicious of all pernicious laws. Liguori teaches that such laws are no laws, and Bellarmine says the want of power alone justifies submission to them. The authority that administers these pernicious laws falls yearly under the anathema of the Pope, and in the jurisprudence of Rome, an anathematized sovereign is virtually a deposed sovereign. So the times were changing in Great Britain. Roman Catholics, after whining and crying that they didn't have any power, and they were being suppressed by the Protestant laws of Great Britain, begged for some liberty. So England gave them some liberty, so the Pope just took over. And then said, the sovereign, the queen, the government, is no queen and no government at all. Surprise, you've been invaded. And the country now belongs to us. And we are the government. the cardinals, the archbishops, the bishops, and the priests, and the Roman Catholics. 1865, only 150 years ago. Never heard a word about it in school, did you? Why did they keep this information from us? Were they afraid that we might wake up to the reality of what's going on in Washington, D.C.? That the very same strategies were employed early in the founding of this country? And that Rome has been just letting us live in peace and delusion, our Protestant delusion, all these years? Certainly looks that way to me. Now, James A. Wiley is going to talk more about this subject. He's going to show how insidious and stealthy Roman Catholicism is when they come into a nation to take over. This portion of his book is entitled Rome's Sappers and Miners. Okay? Sappers and miners is a common expression back in those days, but what it means is, in our generation, the word might be better used as infiltrators. Okay? Rome's infiltrators. He says the weapons with which the papacy maintains the conflict in our country are different indeed from those with which it is fighting so resolutely abroad. In other words, outside of England. He says, I dare not employ the dungeon as in Rome, it dare not employ the dungeon as it does in Rome, as it does in Naples, and as it does in Tuscany. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church hasn't gotten to that much power yet in Great Britain, is what he's trying to tell you. But the dungeon is used. That's part of the discipline of the Roman Catholic Church. That's the legitimate form that the discipline of Roman Catholic canon law takes. The dungeon. Okay? That's their jurisprudence. If you're in violation of Roman Catholic canon law, you've thrown off the authority of the Pope, you've become labeled a heretic by the Roman Catholic Church and excommunicated from the church. In Rome and in Naples and in Tuscany, you'd be thrown into the dungeon. Okay, Rome has not yet that much power in Great Britain at the time of the writing of this book. He says further, it, meaning Rome, cannot exchange concordats with the British government, declaring the faith of Rome to be the only recognized and tolerated religion in the country, and calling on the magistrate to assist in expelling all heretical books, that is, Protestant books, as in Spain, for instance. So there's James A. Wiley is laying out for us that while Rome is setting up her government and already declaring that the Pope, or that rather the Queen and the Parliament have no power, and they're being overthrown, Rome still has some limitations. They haven't got the dungeon yet, and they haven't passed a concordat with the British government yet, and they can't command the civil authorities, the magistrates, the judges in the country, to go through the schools and go through the churches and go through the libraries and remove all Protestant literature and burn it in the square like they do in Spain. All right? So Rome hasn't come full control yet. And it says it cannot launch excommunications at dying ministers of state, forbidding a grave of their ashes and paradise to their spirits, as in Piedmont. Piedmont, another Roman Catholic country, after Rome had literally run the Waldenses out of the country, Piedmont became completely controlled by the papacy, and the rulers of that area, as in all Roman Catholic countries, could be forbidden a Christian burial if they disobeyed the Pope. And they would be, forbidden from paradise by the Pope, too, if they disobeyed the Pope. Well, the Pope didn't yet have that much power in Great Britain. It was still in the process of overthrowing the government. It hadn't completely won yet. Now he says it cannot claim exemption from the secular tribunals in behalf of its priests as in Austria. All right? Rome at the time of the writing of this book did not yet have, England didn't respect Rome's demand that the priests be immune from the civil government. In other words, at this time, even as far advanced as Rome's overthrow of the government was, the government couldn't go arrest a priest for raping a little boy in Roman Catholic countries. They could in England. Okay? The priests have complete immunity from the civil law in Roman Catholic countries. The civil authorities can't even cross the threshold of a church in search of a pedophile, not legally according to Roman Catholic canon law. If there were, in a Roman Catholic country, such as Austria was, if a pedophile priest was being pursued by the victims' families or whatever, they couldn't rely upon the civil government to go make an arrest. And if the civil government did go make an arrest, it would be in direct disobedience of the papacy. And they would be held up for sanction from the Pope. The whole town would be under punishment from the Pope for arresting a priest. All right, it hadn't gotten that far yet in Great Britain at the time of the writing of this book. Now he says that that the Vatican cannot close schools and colleges or do what is tantamount, teaching in them only the glories of Mary and the virtues of chrism, as in France and Ireland. France and Ireland being Roman Catholic countries. So at this time, Rome still lacked the power to close the schools and the colleges, the Protestant schools and colleges, which he is free to do in France and Ireland at the time of the writing of this book. And if he didn't close the schools and the colleges, at least he couldn't command the schools and the colleges to teach the worship of Mary and the virtues of the chrism, the holy water of the Roman Catholic Church. He says, but it is fighting resolutely nevertheless, and with the more success, doubtless, that it dare not here employ those coarse weapons which it is wielding with such hearty energy and goodwill abroad. So he's just laid out for us what limitations yet lie in front of this papal assault on Great Britain. Now he says, here it plies silently, but ceaselessly, the mattock and the spade. In other words, the pick and the shovel. It works mole-like, like a mole, underground, and hour by hour is advancing its trenches nearer our walls and sinking its mine deeper under our Constitution. It besieges deathbeds. It erects nunneries, to which, like certain teachers in ancient times, it, quote, leads silly women captive, laden with pelf, and houses them comfortably for a consideration. It opens schools for Christian instruction, in which it takes care to initiate the youth in that one fundamental point of Christianity, as a living writer on the papacy calls it, the primacy of Peter, and strives to impress them with the prosperity that may be expected to attend them through life if they early begin the habit of praying to the Mother of God. It is attempting, Roman Catholicism, the Vatican, is attempting to engraft herself upon the literature, the arts, and the fashionable amusements of the age, that so it may inject its leprous distilment into the mind unawares. Okay, this is actually the use of subliminal tactics. Rome, being careful not to expose her true intent, has implied the beliefs and tenets of Roman Catholicism very subtly in the literature and in the arts and the amusements of the age. Okay? So far, they were limited in just trying to instill a little Roman Catholicism everywhere you look. And if you looked at it and saw it, unless you identified it for what it was, you wouldn't know that Rome was slowly, subliminally indoctrinating you into Catholic belief. Let me wrestle with this a little bit and see if I can give you an example. Oh, here's one. How has Rome subtly, subliminally promoted in this country Roman Catholic teaching without our knowledge? Well, the first example, and you've heard plenty of this, you don't need to hear any more of it possibly, futurism. Okay? But here's another one. That's more overt. Let's talk about something really, really subtle. We know the Bible doesn't teach what is taught in the world today of immortality or the immortality of the soul. We know the Bible teaches this mortal must take on immortality. And we know that happens at the resurrection. That the dead die. Okay? They have no part in anything under the sun, says the Scriptures. Well, Rome has taught about subtly through art and through amusements and through theater and through literature this idea that we can be visited from the grave. One of the most powerful Roman Catholic programs, very subtle though it may be, is Coast to Coast AM by Nuri. Nuri is the name of the host. And they love to talk about goblins and ghosts and dead people, wandering around people's houses and one thing and another. And in kind of a parody, they changed the name of the program for that night, and they call it Coast to Ghost by Nuri. And they've inculcated in the Christian world, whether you're Catholics or Protestants or whatever, everybody believes that the dead speak, that the dead can contact the living. That's Roman Catholicism. That's just one example. It may not be sufficient to demonstrate this to every listener, but they've got control of Hollywood, all the movies that come out. It's all Roman Catholic teaching. You may not recognize it for what it is, but it's in there. I even noticed the other night, I don't watch much television, if any, and I've thrown the demon out as far as I'm concerned, but my wife still watches a little bit. And I was on my way from my office here into the restroom, and I happened to notice she was watching a primetime television program, kind of a goofy, kind of humorous, but it was about a family or whatever. And I noticed the camera was focused on two characters of this family in a room, and on the wall was a solar blaze. And beside it, or close to it, was a crucifix. Now, it was obviously not the subject of the drama that was taking place in this entertaining so-called television program. But it had the subtle icons of the Roman Catholic Church in it. And we have been Romanized all of our lives. If you're of the same generation of me, when you become aware of how Rome has used literature and art and entertainment and every other means to subtly pervert your mind from the scriptures and feed you Roman Catholic flavored information to indoctrinate you, it will startle you. The world is full of it. And so the same thing was going on in Britain at this time, little by little, Catholicizing the people. And that's why the Protestants were unaware of what was really going on in the country. We're just as guilty today. I see I've run out of time. I hate to leave such good company, but I must. The clock is ticking. I'll see you tomorrow on the Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.